Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today we're going to talk about the threat of nuclear weapons. My guest today is an expert on this topic. Mr. Charles Moxley is the principal of Moxley ADR, a law firm specializing in arbitration and mediation. He's an adjunct professor of law at Fordham Law School. His treatise on nuclear weapons and international law could not be more important and timely. Charlie Moxley, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Well, thank you, Bill. Delighted to be here.
I appreciate you being with me today. Let's just dive right into it. Your treatise on nuclear weapons and international law. What were the main points of that?
The area, as you know, Bill, of nuclear weapons is one of broad concern across many constituencies. And there is a lot on it, right? I mean, one could Google it and there'll be a million hits. My focus has been on the law as concerns nuclear weapons. And that has been an area that hasn't been looked at as much as I think it deserves. And that's really what I've tried to focus on.
Wonderful. And our viewers can go to your website at www.moxleyadr.com and get more information about what we're going to be talking about today. You're an arbitrator, a litigator, and a nuclear weapons expert. How do you wrap all these together to deal with this particular topic?
Interesting question. And actually, because of the sort of separation of these topics, my second website, nuclearweaponslaw.org, really has the nuclear weapons stuff. But the way, Bill, I pull all this together is that my experience as a lawyer, as a litigator, has been on handling large, complex securities and contract disputes, commercial disputes around the country. And then in more recent years, as an arbitrator on such disputes, cases involving millions, tens of millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars. And so we look at the facts, we look at the law, we take it all very seriously and do very serious evaluations of facts and law, whether one is in a big international arbitration or in federal court someplace. And so that's what I've tried to do in looking at issues as to of international law and law of armed conflict as concerns nuclear weapons.
Now, so many times you'll hear people arguing and say, well, we've had these nuclear weapons since really we dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So why worry about it? There's a deterrence there. If you have them, people know that the other countries know that you will attack them, and so they're not going to attack you. How is this theory of deterrence? Does it actually work, or should we actually get rid of that and work on a theory of elimination, I should say, eliminating these things?
Yes, I think your question, Bill, is of interest on multiple levels. One is that, as you say, these weapons have been with us for so long, and the policy of deterrence has been with us so long that we've become inured to them, right? They're part of our mindset. When I did the first edition of my book in 2000, it was at a time when the Cold War was winding down and it looked as if we could make progress. The current edition, which is greatly expanded, comes out next month. And I've tried to look at things that have happened in the meantime since then. But what I've found over the years, since the first edition of my book, I've taught a course on nuclear weapons law at the Fordham Law School. And just as you say, we've gotten habituated to this topic. So I think, as you're suggesting, we need to take a fresh look at deterrence, right? On your question, whether deterrence works, the answer, as on so many things, is kind of yes and no. In some senses, it seems very intuitive that it works, but there's other senses in which it is extraordinarily counterproductive and dangerous. I think in an asymmetrical situation where you have a country, a state that is weaker than its adversary, but has nuclear weapons, I don't think there's any question but that the possession of nuclear weapons makes a lot of difference, right? I mean, would we have gone into Iraq or Afghanistan? Would Russia have gone into Ukraine? You know, and we haven't done anything really with North Korea. You know, so having them makes a difference. But two things. One, throughout the Cold War, we obviously had continuous wars and proxy wars with the West and the Soviet bloc supporting their respective interested countries. So deterrence didn't stop that, but it has a role, particularly in the asymmetrical situation. But I think, Bill, the bigger question, and what we often don't get to in our discussion of this, and what I've really tried to focus on in my book, particularly in this second edition coming out imminently, is what deterrence means, right? Because I think it's in a sense intuitive to think of it as, well, it's a policy, right? We have a threat. It is that if the other side does something that we seriously don't like, we may use nuclear weapons. If our vital interests or the vital interests of an ally are affected, we may use these weapons. And on that level, it sounds like a discussion piece, right? It's just something we may do. But I think the fallacy is to think that that's what deterrence is, right? What we have by way of deterrence is not merely a policy, a statement of what we'll do, but we have a whole apparatus. You know, I'd be glad to talk about that, Bill, if you want to take us in that direction. But deterrence means a readiness and a having trained our people and having our equipment and so much more. So it's very and trying to answer your question, that's the downside of deterrence. And you know, if you look at my the book that's coming out, the subtitle, it is, as you say, Nuclear Weapons and International Law, but the subtitle is Existential Risks of Nuclear War and Deterrence through a legal lens. You know, and that's the element of the risks that come out of this structure.
Exactly. And a lot of people argue that, well, no rational person is going to launch a nuclear war with another country, because basically we'd be destroying the planet. If Russia and the United States or US and China or whatever started launching nuclear weapons, that would be the end of us. We'd have a nuclear winter. We would not be able to raise our crops, that type of thing. But there's also that hidden problem. We're talking about an existential threat. Accidents happen. And there have been, I know of at least 12 incidents in the past where we almost had a nuclear exchange. Has that improved any? Have they developed a fail-safe system where they don't launch or a computer can launch a nuclear weapon by mistake, or AI can come in and launch one?
I know it's only gotten tougher as a challenge, I think,
is.
as you suggest, because of AI. There's a wonderful report by the Chatham Group, which collects these near misses. There's a book by Schlosser some years ago. I have a chapter in the new edition of my book. And as you say, there have been innumerable instances where the US, with all our safeguards and efforts, Russia the Soviet Union came quite close to a mistake. And because of a perception of being under attack when it wasn't the case. So it's a huge problem. We could spend a half a day talking about what AI will do to this and make the situation better or worse.
That's
But
right. I'm getting frightened already. Yeah. Well, we're going to come back in just a minute and talk about what we can do to reduce the nuclear stockpile. But in the meantime, we'll do a quick mid-show ID. Where you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with the PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you have a podcast, or you just have a computer, you like our shows and you'd like to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today, we're taking a look at the threat of nuclear weapons and what could possibly happen and what can we do to avoid some type of nuclear exchange. My guest is an expert on this topic. Mr. Charlie Moxley is the principal of Moxley ADR. He also is the author of Nuclear Weapons and International Law. Charlie, I don't want to, there's so many issues of nuclear weapons we can get into, but one that's of concern right now is we have 9 nuclear powers that we know of, that even Israel, which won't say it is or it isn't, but it is. Everybody knows that. But there are 9, but there are also other countries like Saudi Arabia, South Korea, Japan, different ones talking about getting nuclear weapons. How devastating would that be if people started nuking up instead of nuking down?
I think you make a good point. One success we've had through the NPT, the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty, is we've kept the numbers down somewhat, right? From the original group, we've had, of course, India and Pakistan and North Korea and Israel have gotten, as you say, nuclear weapons. But the more proliferation you get, the more fragmented the control gets and the risks get, the more likely we have a catastrophe. So I think it's a huge problem and one we have to focus on.
Exactly. We need to strive to make sure that nobody else gets nuclear weapons. You can use nuclear technology for peaceful purposes. That's in the Nonproliferation Treaty. But to get them to build nuclear weapons is off the board. Well, now we have a discussion going on by the heads of the military here in the United States and other countries too, I'm sure, that the nuclear stockpile is aging. It's getting old, it's getting decrepit, the computers are outdated, that type of thing, which all lends the direction that we could actually have a nuclear exchange by mistake. But they're talking about retooling, rebuilding, and coming up with a whole new nuclear stockpile. And they say it'll only cost $1 trillion. Well, anyone who believes that, I've got a bridge I'll sell them. That won't happen. You're talking trillions of dollars that we don't have. And also trillions that could be spent for roads and schools and a variety of other programs. What can be done to make sure we don't retool this aging stockpile? Or should we? Maybe you believe we should. I don't know. It's your call.
I think that when the Soviet Union disbanded, as it were, disintegrated, there was an opportunity because there was a situation, as you say, where U.S. and Soviet and Russian nuclear weapons were rather old. And we could have gone in a different direction and said, we are truly going to de-emphasize, we're going to step back, we're going to recognize the risks. But we went in this other direction of so-called modernization, which, while sold in the U.S. as keeping things current and updating, really has appears very much to be an expansion of our nuclear situation. We should stop that. We should pull it back. One direction, if I may, Bill, I'd like to move us into it at some point in our discussion, is on the legal piece, because I think that's a big part of it. But I think on your point about modernization, it's huge. I mean, I was looking at the numbers when we were talking yesterday, you know, and the latest, and every time you look at them, they go up. I mean, our budget, the U.S. budget for nuclear, and excuse my looking away here, I got this other screen, for the period of 2023 to 2032 is now up to 756 billion that we've identified as part of our military budget, which is for nuclear. The numbers are astronomical, and I think we should pull it back for, you know, for policy reasons, but also there is the legal piece, which I think is a unappreciated part of the discussion and potential opportunity to make some progress to change our perception of whether we can actually do something about the existential risks of these weapons.
Exactly. And earlier you mentioned Undersecretary General Nakamitsu, and that reminded me that she has been a guest on this program a couple of times. She's on the website at globalconnectionstelevision.com, and she heads up the United Nations disarmament operation. And the UN is really the epicenter of bringing the countries of the world together to crack arrangements, treaties like the Nonproliferation Treaty, Small Guns Treaty, and different ones like that. How important is it that countries and people participate and learn more about what's going on at the United Nations?
I think the United Nations is important. Izumi Nakamitsu's voice is a strong and powerful one in this area, as has been the Secretary General's. And I think there's a lot we can learn by paying attention to their focus and how they've put this together. But I think, Bill, that the solution has to come from us, from the United States, because if you look, and when we, in our prep session, you had mentioned the current number of 13,000 nuclear weapons out there, and I pulled out the calculator and looked at it. Over 90% of the world's nuclear weapons today are held by the U.S. and Russia, and we have roughly comparable numbers. They have more low yield, smaller ones, slightly larger numbers overall, but essentially each side could destroy the world, God knows, 20 times over. So I think it's up to the U.S. at this point, really, and that's why this awareness has to be raised, you know, to call on our leaders and get some focus on getting these controls and the extraordinary expenses focused on. And I think we can do a lot better in this area.
Exactly. I think you're absolutely right. And we all need to learn more about this issue. As I see it, and you correct me if I'm wrong, we need the media to focus more on this issue, to talk about the potential dangers. We need to educate students in at all levels. I'm talking about from grade 1 all the way up. And also we need to educate members of Congress. I've heard, you have too, I'm sure, some of the zaniest theories spun off by some members of Congress saying, well, we can have a limited war. We can have a limited exchange. No, you can't, because you don't know when the enemy is going to stop shooting nuclear weapons at you. And you don't know how detrimental those weapons will be to your environment, to your water supply, to your milk supply. It's absolutely insane, some of the nutty ideas that come out of Congress. How do you perceive that?
And I think that's right. And I think that our thinking has become kind of automatic on that. You know, we started with the Cold War with our so-called triad. Remember that we're going to have land-based, air-based, and submarine-based nuclear weapons. And you know what? We still have that. But what's the problem? The problem is that the large percent of our nuclear weapons are land-based ICBMs that are not buried and protected, not mobile. They are sitting ducks. So it is a very insecure, destabilizing situation because they could be destroyed in a first strike by an enemy that had sufficient weapons to hit them. And so why do it that way? Why not focus on the weapons that are not vulnerable to a first strike? You know, even as we lead to, you mentioned earlier, this disarmament versus abolition. And I didn't want to not, fail to come back on that. I think you're right on there that the objective, for many reasons, and I wish, we had more time, for many reasons of policy and of law, of established legal principles, has to be abolition. We need arms control. We need to take the numbers down, but we have agreed under the NPT to negotiate abolition, and we need to live up to that treaty obligation of our country, and try to make that happen.
We certainly do. There's no doubt about it. And this whole nuclear issue is so extremely dangerous and also expensive. You mentioned the $4 or $5 billion, but years ago I saw a figure, I think would tie right into your figure, that it costs the U.S. government like this was years ago, $125 million a day just to maintain the nuclear stockpile. Stop and think what we could do with $125 million every day more, and add that up at the end of the 365 days a year. But the American people, I don't think, really are aware of this. And of course, on the other side, you got the military industrial complex. They just love to come up with new ideas, new weapons. A lot of them are boondoggles, like the F-35 jet, which is a total disaster, trillions of dollars wasted. And we've got to do something differently. And so here in the last 2 minutes, tell us what we can do differently that we haven't talked about up to this point.
Well, I think your point about the American people not knowing and being aware, I think that's central. Robert McNamara wrote an introduction to the first edition of my book where he said, if the American people knew the structure we have, where our president solely on an individual basis with no time to deliberate or consider can get us into a nuclear war, that there'd be much greater concern. So I think we need to raise awareness. I think we need to, and perhaps at another time we can talk more about the legal piece, but there are legal limitations that if the leaders in the Congress and in the government understood, I think, and then we made a decision to try to negotiate with Russia and other nuclear weapons countries to implement this law, I think we could make progress. I think there's also, as you say, substantial policy changes we need to make in terms of arms control, no first use, and other policy areas.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there are things that we need to do, and we've talked about many of them today, and people really need to get attuned to how dangerous this issue is and how expensive it is. It's not just a matter of we're going to blow up the planet and kill everybody. We're destroying our budget and our economy in the process, but it's absolutely critical that we do this. And we really need to educate politicians in particular, because they're policy makers. And our former president, he just loosely, cavalierly talked about launching nuclear weapons against North Korea. Like it was no big deal. Like, well, I get out of bed and I'll do that. But we have a serious issue and we have to work on this together. But Charlie Moxley, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you, Bill, so much. I appreciate your focusing on this issue, which I think, as you say, needs a lot more attention.
My pleasure. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.